To welcome you to the 2015 NCUW National Day at the Capitol. My name is Holly Hill Murphy, and I'm a member VP of programs from the Augusta chapter, one of the newest chapters to the NCUW. And of course, we know that it's raining outside, but it's going to be bright and shiny in here. And again, I say good morning, good morning. This is a happy Thursday. And at first, I want to give all honor to God, for He's the head of my life, and to all the distinguished members here and in the audience. And as well, we know that we are women on a mission. And for our journey today, we want to say that we are women that are loose, and the wait is over. So we're here to get this mission started and move on in the community. So we have a journey to inspire, uplift, and enrich the lives of others. Amen. And again, I say welcome. I'm sorry, and one more thing I would like to say, please forgive me. What I want to do as well, we have a committee that has been composed of the chapters from the Augusta chapter, the Mecca chapter, the Decatur DeKalb chapter as well, and the Stone Mountain Lithonia chapter. And as I call your name, would you please stand, because we've been working for the past couple months to get this day started, and so we can move forward on our journey to enrich the lives of others. And our committee member, Jamise Buford.
She's right here.
Okay.
Good morning.
Jamise is the president for the Mecca chapter.
No.
I'm sorry, not the Mecca. The
Metro Atlanta.
Metro Atlanta chapter. And Minnie Milner with the beautiful hat on right there. Good morning. Monica Ponder.
She's over here.
Okay. And of course, we have Tiffany, who's worked so hard. Tiffany Farrell. Yes, worked so hard and diligent, as we all have, but she's been the rock of this to get everything started, and we're so thankful and grateful for all that you've done. Okay, and for the Augusta chapter, of course, I've already, myself, our president that's standing now, is the Honorable Dr. Lori Miles.
All right.
Okay, we have Ravon, I'm sorry. I want to give prestige to my president. So we're going to go ahead with the other committee members. Deborah Curtis from the Decatur chapter. Sharonda Jackson. Paula Roberts. And these are members from the Mecca chapter. Marion Woods. Sheila Hawkins. Darlene Kims. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Darlene Compton. She's from Northwest Georgia chapter.
Northwest Georgia chapter, okay. Dr. Candace Cabell. And she's from Northwest chapter as well. Lavinia Holloway is from the Stone Mountain Lithonia chapter. And Hadash Bruce. And like I say, again, we welcome you, and please enjoy.
Good morning, ladies. Good morning. We are so happy to have everyone here today. And and so this morning, I wanted to just take a few moments to acknowledge all of those who are amongst us, all of our sisters, but there are some special people that we wanted to make sure that we did get an opportunity to announce. And so I'd like to announce our chapter presidents that are here. And our chapter presidents are Jamise Buford from Metropolitan Atlanta chapter. Dr. Lori Miles, she is the president of the Augusta chapter. Ms. Paula Roberts, who is not here with us today, I don't believe, but she is the president of the Mecca chapter. Ms. Norma Johnson, the president of the Decatur DeKalb chapter. All right, and the president of the Northwest Georgia chapter, Cheryl Cole. and Lavinia Holloway is the president of Stone Mountain Lithonia chapter. I don't think she's here with us yet. All right, and let's also give a round of applause for our NCBW National Georgia officers. So we have the unique privilege here in Georgia in that our chapters have quite a few national offers from Georgia, and that is Lavinia Harris. She's the first vice president, and she resides with the Metropolitan Atlanta chapter. Cynthia Williams, she's the second vice president. She also resides with the Metropolitan Atlanta chapter. And our financial secretary is Paula Ward, and she is, unfortunately, was not able to make it today, but she is from the Mecca chapter also. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we will begin our panel discussion. So please, if you open up, we have a lot of questions that were submitted. So these ladies are going to answer them all for you. I'll now bring up Jamise Buford, who will introduce our moderator for our panel, Ms. Hattie Dorsey.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Say after me, you're in the right place.
You're in the right place.
At the right time.
At the right time.
The right thing.
The right thing.
This morning.
This morning.
This morning. It's going to go into noon. So I am so delighted to be with you today on this liquid sunshiny day.
Yes, right, love it.
So it didn't distract us, Representative Frazier, or any of our motives to come down here to be seen, be heard, and advocate as we move the mission forward. I have the great opportunity to be able to introduce one of my favorite people, Hattie Dorsey. You don't have to do it now, but when you get a chance, Google Hattie Dorsey. And when you do that, and I did this last night and I did it this morning, it comes up like every time. And you can do it now if you won't get distracted, but the first headliner when you Google says the history makers. So there is a beautiful, oh my goodness, article in the nation's largest African American video oral history collection online. So I took some excerpts from it to share with you because I know how Hattie is. She's ready to get down to what? Business, right? But I want you to know who is very dear to me, our founding president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Metropolitan Atlanta chapter, a trailblazer. If you get to know her when she calls, answer the phone and make sure whatever it is she asks you to do, you do it. She is also the founder and former president of the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership. Anybody heard of ANDP?
Yes.
All right, so affectionately ANDP, when you think about that, you think about Hattie. Now, did you all know that she hails from Teaching, North Carolina? Did I say it right? All right. I want to make sure I get that right. But when she was very young, she moved to New York. Because I was wondering, where does that accent come from? So she has that New York northern swag to her voice. And she moved here to Atlanta and matriculated at Spelman and then later transitioned over to Clark. And I tell you, she in Atlanta has really paved the way for many people like us in the room here. So, Hattie Dorsey, I don't know if you all know that, but she continued her civil rights work by working on the NAACP's legal defense team through the 70s and the 80s, helping to bring, yes, you can clap. Awesome news, right? Helping to bring landmark legal suits against those who practice housing discrimination. Hattie, thank you for that. Because when things are unpopular sometimes, if you don't have people at the front with the voice and the passion that she has, things get often left behind. I want you to also know that as the president of ANDP, she worked to solidify Metro Atlanta Neighborhoods and Community Development Corporations. She is known as a pioneer and a person who moves missions and people forward. She's received many awards to include but not limited to Spelman College Local Community Service Award, Atlanta Women's Magazine for Woman of the Year. The list goes on and on. She has a daughter who affectionately is called Michelle, and they live in Atlanta. She has a beautiful granddaughter as well. She is a history maker, and we are so delighted that today, as we make her story here at the Capitol on this liquid sunshiny day, that she's going to help moderate and bring the experts that we have on the panel together to have the discussions that we need to have as the National Coalition of 100 Black Women moves to advocate in the areas of education, health, and empowering women. So without further ado, my friend, one of my BFFs, someone who I think doesn't need an introduction. We are so glad to have you here, Hattie. I'll turn the podium over to you.
Well, good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
I just slim through the middle.
Whenever somebody tells where I was born, I think about what my father said, that the train picked up speed going through the little town. My mother, he and my mother met and married in New York, but she had never been to a gynecologist before. And so when she made her first visit, she got off the table and headed back south. And that's why I was delivered by a midwife in Teaching, North Carolina. And it's a really small town, still is a very small town, but I hail from there and I claim it with pride. The importance of, I guess, advocacy, legislative power being challenged is so very important and so critical in today's world. And I have always hoped and pushed when I was chapter president and national president of 100 that we were to use our voice. And if we didn't use our voice, it would be to our chagrin. So many things are happening around us, and I am so happy to have two of the women who are on the panel today with us. I'm sure the others are caught in traffic or trying to find a parking space, just as I had to, and all of you had to as well. But the issues that we face in our country, in our state, and in our cities are very, very harsh at this particular point in time. It sometimes seems as if we're in a regressive mode. We thought that we had put behind us through our civil rights activities and our gains as it passed, that we had achieved. But it was just a skirmish, it was just a battle. We had not won because it's regressing, and I think there is such hatred beginning to surface.
Yes.
And we see it playing out in so many ways. And so today we're going to cover with our panelists some of the issues that face us. We have with us Dr. Indigo Triplett, and I'm not going to read their bios because you have them in front of you, but she is CEO of Careers in Transition.
Yes.
And she has the ability to work with corporations and their human resource departments, and both at the Fortune 500 companies level as well as with governmental entities. And so her knowledge of getting into the world of work, empowerment through the world of work, is very essential to the conversation we're going to have today. Cost health is also a concern, not only just for ourselves as grown-ups, but also for our children. And so we're going to discuss with Ms. Monica Ponta, those subjects around health. Many questions have been submitted. I'm going to try and cover as many as possible, but I was sent a long list of questions. Of course, we can't get through them in the time allocated today. But we have questions that are going to really, I hope, delve into some of the empowerment issues that, and I would like to start off with that. The empowerment issues. We have a gap, and we've been talking about pay equity. We've been talking about how, in fact, do we close the gap with reference to pay. And just recently, Emily's List was held a big conference in Washington, D.C., where Hillary Clinton addressed that subject of pay equity. Pay equity becomes so very important to us as women because oftentimes we have to be not only a part of the workforce, we're heads of household. And so other issues is that time off with pay as well. So let's begin to have that conversation and just talk about a bit, and then we can perhaps ask a question or two from the audience that I may have skipped. But let's talk about pay and economic development activities. Could you start that off for us?
Well, what's interesting, one of the things that I shared with my employees years ago when they asked, why do I do what I do? I have a company, Careers in Transition, and I was able to build it to a multi-million-dollar company. For 2 years, actually 3 years in a row, I was listed in Inc. magazine as being the top 500 fastest growing companies in America. And when people would ask me what drove me to do this, it was because I wanted to create jobs. And the thing is, many of the people I surrounded myself with were powerful women. I believe behind every great man is a powerful woman, and behind every great woman is a powerful woman. And so I was very fortunate to understand that earlier on in my career and would surround myself. But what I would find, when men would come in and interview, and when women would come in and interview, we did not position ourselves to get the same pay. We didn't have the courage to ask for what we were worth. We would allow people to say, this is what you're going to make, and we may say, is there a little more on the table? And if they said no, it's like, okay. No, not knowing that a lot of it comes from your strength and your position when you're negotiating. Now that's not to say that there are systemic problems in the system that causes us to, what is it, I want to say it's about 71 cents right now a dollar that we're making. But a lot of that came into place because at one time, men were the household, head of the household, and they came up with that and it was okay. But things have changed. And if you really look at statistics, there are more women who are becoming millionaires over men rapidly. But the things that we're doing to get there is causing us to unravel. So a lot of it, I hope that we can talk about how we're handling this success. But for right now, to stick with the topic, yes, I believe a lot of our problem is not so much that it's 71 cents or so on the dollar, but rather our inability to negotiate with power and confidence.
What kind of legislation do you believe we need to have in place that, I guess, equalizes the playing field? Is there anything that government can do, or is it, I know there are policies on the book, but are they being enforced around the whole issue of pay equity, doing the job and getting paid for the job, and not just because of the fact that you're a woman in the job?
Well, I think what it's going to take, to be honest with you, is not so much as legislation, even though that would be great, but I also think it's going to take, when women get into a position of power, that we start making changes in these organizations. We are starting to get the vice president level, but we don't have enough women in the CEO level. That is still deplorable when we look at corporations, what is it called? Corporations that are your let's talk about UPS, your Fortune 500, all these companies. We have women who are making and breaking strides in this, the vice president. But when it comes to the CEO, when they can really turn the tables, it's not happening there. That's where we're having a problem, and that's where we need to make changes.
Okay, anybody from the audience want to ask a question before we move on? If not, I'll ask the next question.
I do have a question. We have one question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Good morning. Thank you so much for
Tell
being
your name and chapter.
Yes, my name is Lysandra Boykin, and I'm with the Metro Atlanta chapter. And my question is, you talked about women coming into power in these organizations and making changes. How do you think they go about making those changes? What are the things that they need to do? What would you say is your top 2 or 3 things that you feel like they need to do to make those changes?
Well, one is that we have boards that represent us. When you're talking about the boards of these Fortune 500 companies. And then once we get into these positions, unfortunately, let's just be really, really honest, sometimes we don't open the door. We don't, I was a Marine, so I use a lot of military references. And so when people would fight and we have to go through, say, barbed wire fence, someone had to hold that fence to let other people come through. But sometimes, out of fear of holding the fence, we just go through and hope that things will work out, and it doesn't, because you don't have enough people surrounding you to protect you. And so I say to us, because many of us are on our way, to make sure that you hold the fence and bring some others along with you, to surround yourself with a team of people who can help you. I gotta be very honest with you. I surrounded myself at one point with predominantly men, just at one point in my career. And that was the worst time of my career. I almost, and I'm just being very transparent, I almost lost it all because they started looking out for themselves to the detriment of even me.
Yes.
So that was a lesson learned, that you gotta surround yourself with each other and have each other's back. And I think the organization that you're in espouses that. And I think when we talk about all these different organizations across America, that's one of the things we got to say to each other, that we don't just do it in our organization, but when we go to the workplace on Monday morning, we are surrounding ourselves with one another and uplifting one another.
There was a message that my mother used to always say, especially to her kids as we were growing up and entering the work world. You go do good. You work well so that you're making a place for somebody else to follow you. And I believe I carried that as well as we all should carry that idea, that assumption, is that we're making a path for somebody else, and how we work. And the whole school of help somebody else, pull somebody else up behind you is really, really critical in today's world. Because if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it for us. If we don't open up the door when we get in the door, and we close it sometimes behind ourselves, because that's, almost human nature. You don't want anybody else to challenge you. And so we close the door behind us, and then we look around, like you indicated, you don't have a support system behind you. So I appreciate that statement so very much. I want to move a little bit and we're going to come back and talk about empowerment issues as well, because I think also I want to talk about the fair labor standards, not standards, but pay. It's like what we're having now is an argument about what the minimum wage ought to be. And in the state of Georgia, the minimum wage, if nobody understands, is $5.20, I believe, and not $7.10. So we still have a mountain to climb in this state. So we need to talk about how, in fact, we challenge our state legislatures to do something about that. Going to health, there's so many issues that we're going to really have to understand and fight for. And some of the questions that was positioned by our members is around diversity, not of diversity, but obesity. I didn't come up with diversity. Yes. But obesity, and Michelle Obama, our First Lady, is pushing obesity as a health issue. And we have to sometimes look at why obesity is so prevalent in our community and then among us as African Americans. And so I'm going to ask Monica Ponda, who specializes in health issues and communications, to address obesity and other health issues that we face as African Americans and what we can do about it. Healthy eating is one, but what else do you think we ought to be doing?
Thank you. So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I'm here as a proud member of NCBW, the Metropolitan Atlanta chapter, but also as a board member of Georgians for a Healthier Future. And obesity is just one of many issues we could talk about this morning, along with hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, many prevalent chronic conditions. But I will answer the question, which is obesity. And Georgia has a rate of about 30% of adults that are considered obese by Centers for Disease Control Standards. And it is my personal and professional opinion that a lot of times obesity is not necessarily how you move, but what you eat and what you consume, which really gets into the policy part of conversations. I want to challenge each of you to take time with your families, with your churches, with your local chapters, to host a screening of the documentary Fed Up. Fed Up was released last May, and it's facilitated, hosted by Katie Couric, and features several subject matter experts. But it talks about how, you have a lot of people that may work out religiously, but they never quite lose weight. How many of you guys may know someone like that? Bless their little hearts. And I think even just being candid in this room, as Black women, one of the professional criticisms I have of Black Girls Run is that it's great for community engagement, it's great for micro-organizing, and it does a lot for momentum building and coalition building within zip codes for Black women, but a lot of the women don't lose weight. Because if you don't get the diet, nutrition aspect of health, you're not gonna lose weight in a way that is rapid and sustainable and healthy. And the documentary talks about sugar. Sugar, also another big bucket is sodium. A lot of these are native in foods that we buy without even us having to add anything. And I like that documentary because it really breaks down how our policy infrastructure is directly to blame for our sugar consumption. When you intake too much sugar, your body can't break down everything. What does it turn into? It turns into fat. And so when you have children who go to school, who have access to a variety of lunch options, a variety of snack food options, which ones are they going to choose? The ones with sugar. When you have processed sugar, sugars that really are man-made, that are pennies on the dollar to produce, what do you think you're going to consume? A lot of sugar. Even when you buy low-fat foods, you may think that you're buying something healthy for yourself and your families, when really it's only 10 grams lower than what the full-bodied version of that food is. And a lot of that is regulated by policy. And so the Let's Move campaign has done a great stride, particularly for children. But really the culprits are private sector companies that manufacture our foods. 80% of foods in grocery stores consume some type of processed sugar. So I leave you both with an action item. The homework is to watch Fed Up. The action item is, as best you can, to prepare your own meals for your family. Try to go from farm to table if you can, buy vegetables, buy protein. If you do have to use processed food, try to do whole grains, that is boxed, or things that are in their most natural form. And then follow policy, because there are a lot of corporations who spend time at the Capitol buildings within states and within national governments to make sure that there are no regulations on how we consume food, how it's sold, and how it's marketed.
Thank you very much. Health encompasses so very much. And one of the things that I think is very critical for us to begin to understand is the health coverage gap. We are fighting, I think, on a national basis, even today at the Supreme Court, about health care. And healthcare issues affect all of us as a nation, but it's particularly African Americans and other indigenous communities. When I say that, I'm talking about the poor in our state who cannot access any form of health care. And Medicaid in this state, and I wish we had our legislators with us right now, because I think we need to position that as how are we going to carry this battle forward? How are we going to insist that all human beings ought to have access to health care? And so I would like you to discuss that, Ms. Ponder, as well, is what do you think the Coalition of 100 Black Women in their advocacy position can do to help push this subject and stay on our state legislators to make certain that something happens?
So this is a very sensitive topic for me. So I'm from South Georgia, Albany, Georgia. That particular county has some of the highest rates of some of the issues I mentioned before. And I've also spent time here at the Capitol, and I'm sure you all know that there has been such a strong resistance to not expand Medicaid in the state. And that leaves a gap, a coverage gap of about 500,000 Georgians that do not have any type of coverage. So think about those of us who can be proactive with our health care. When we've had a cold a bit too long, we can call our doctor. When we need to be on a special birth control or other type of health issues, we can call our doctors. But think about people who do not have those options here in the state. And one of the major criticisms is that, the expanding Medicaid would just overrun our healthcare system and there won't be enough doctors to care for the sick patients. Things that are really just false in terms of, if you really break out the numbers. And yes, Georgia is a red state, but there are also red states like Kentucky who found other private sector remedies to offer health care for consumers. So there's more that can be done. So the first thing I would advocate for us to do collectively is to, one, follow the conversation and make sure that we're aware of the counter messages to why there's such resistance to just a basic right for health care. The other part of it is for those who are eligible, to make sure they know that they're eligible, who also understand that they qualify for it, but they may not know that there are programs within the state that they qualify for. And then if people are using state programs like Medicaid, making sure they have a positive experience. And making sure that the state is accountable in terms of the quality of our prevention and care that we treat. And a big bucket of that also is just preventative health care. To make sure that people take care of themselves and they have the resources to be able to control their blood pressure. Maybe even buying a self-measured blood pressure monitor. A chapter sponsors 50 monitors and they give them out in the community. Or other things that are very simple, hosting a cooking class on how to make some of our favorite foods, but with low sodium and lower options of what we just talked about before. And also there's something a lot of people don't know about is our tobacco tax. We have one of the lowest tobacco taxes here in the state. So think about it, smoking is proven to be just deadly, but Georgia makes it easy for people to smoke. So even just increasing barriers from a policy perspective so that those decisions that are bad are not as easy to make, even if it is a financial consequence and a financial benefit to the state. Small policies like that are like the small steps that we can take today to begin to realize some healthier options and outcomes for the state.
Well, we've just been joined by House Representative Doretha Dworkin-Hager, and welcome. So you arrived just in time. You arrived just in time for a discussion around Medicaid, the healthcare gap, and what can we do as African American women to sort of help you make certain that the right legislation gets passed. And I want to also come back and talk a bit about how corporations can be of assistance, because once upon a time we depended on corporations for our health care, and businesses and organizations we work for to provide it, but that's beginning to diminish as some of them are pushing their employees. So tell us, Representative, how in fact we can help you get Medicaid on the table of the state.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you for this awesome panel. I'm surprised that I'm even going to answer this question because you all already know the answers because you're here. The work that the 100 Black Women does across the state of Georgia and the nation speaks volumes. And so when I was listening to your response when I came in, I was like, she already gave all of the answers of what needs to be done as far as what we can do in the state of Georgia other than lobbying. And that's why you're here, to lobby, to help us, to be the undergirding voice, to help us push the agenda forward. Because when we're here, and Representative Frazier can attest to this, it's almost impossible for us to do this work without you. It's only so much we can do because we're in the minority. But you all are the outside game. And that's what I like to call it, because we're the inside game. We're the policy makers. But it requires outside game people like you all to pick up the phone, to make the calls, to write the emails, to come down to the Capitol, to pull the legislators out, to be the moral compass of the people. And so the more you speak, the more you're heard. And so the squeaky wheel, that's true, it gets the oil. And so I can just count. Can you count, Representative Frazier, how many emails you get from certain people? And those are the people that we respond back to. And so you don't have to just pull out your individual legislators. Go pull those people out who sit on those committees, who make those decisions. And sometimes you have to shame people. Just shame them. When we were growing up, you did something wrong, what would your parents do? They would shame you. If you took something that didn't belong to you or said something you shouldn't have said or showed out in church, they had no problem coming from the usher board, from the back door, or coming off the choir stand and would pull you up in the middle of the church service and shame your behind so you would never do it again on Sunday morning. Well, shame them. Just say, it's shameful that 600,000 people don't have health care. It's shameful that people have to beg to get health care. Shame them. And so the more we shame them, the more they'll be held accountable. And so that's what I said we can do.
But also, and just thinking about what you just said, we don't always recognize or appreciate the economic impact of not having Medicaid in our state, because many of our rural areas, their hospitals, their clinics are dependent on Medicaid support and financing their healthcare system in the rural areas. And so now I think the reality, and maybe it might be easier for you to give this message, the reality is that people who are in critical care cannot get access to health care unless they go 15, 20 miles away. If you're in the process of having a heart attack and an ambulance got to come 20 miles in order to get you and then go 20 miles back to take you someplace to get treated, you're probably dead by the time you get there.
That's right, and for some rural areas, it's more than 15, 20 miles. And now, many of our rural hospitals are closing because they're not able to get the funding they need because of Medicaid expansion. And so what we've tried to do, the Democratic Caucus, and Representative Frazier can speak to this, is we've tried to make it also an economic stimulus package to say, you know, this is going to create so many jobs in the state of Georgia, since this is the #1 place, according to the governor, to do business. But that message doesn't seem to resonate the way it needs to resonate. So that's why I said go back to shaming them, because you know, we've tried everything logical, you know, the logical thing, people need health care. This can create jobs. It's the right thing to do. Well, that doesn't work. So what we're gonna do, we gotta do all means necessary. It's gonna have to be like a Malcolm X kind of approach. By any means necessary, but people need health care.
Well, we have someone willing to chime in on that. Would you address that, Representative Frazier?
Yes, and thank you. And I ditto what my chairwoman has said. I represent rural Georgia. I represent Byrd County. My hospital is approximately 55 miles from MCG. And it is on the verge of closing. And this is because of not expanding Medicaid for one, and also because of a lot of our hospitals are being mismanaged. And so we just have to say what it is. It is what it is. And we are not focused on health care for folks like we used to be, not like our parents and your parents used to be. And so we have to do better, because we are responsible for every one. I'm responsible for every one of my constituents in District 126, and I have 53,000, the same amount Dee has in her district up here. And so healthcare, education, the #1, and jobs, of course, is the #1 concerns that we have. So they are, you know, when you're losing things, they try to create other things like cyber medicine. Now they want to put in TV screens, and they want you to talk to a doctor through the internet and tell you your problems. But I'm in the rural Georgia. My folks want somebody touching them, feeling them, and telling them what's wrong. They want to be able to come in and tell you about your ailment. So that cyber medicine is fine, but in rural Georgia, where I live, I need to have some real doctors that are there to take care of the problems. And we need that throughout the state. We should not be closing hospitals. We should be opening more hospitals. So that's our concern. You as leaders, because every one of you in here are leaders. You're just not a part of a chapter, or you would not have been chosen. So it is up to you. It's incumbent upon all of you all to do what you're doing now. And we need to do it more than one time a year. And like Representative D. Dr. Hagler said, come on up, come on out and call us out. And, you know, we got titles, everybody in here has a title, but you are no more important than the next person. So we're here for a job, call us out and challenge us and say this is what we want. And you do what you have to do. If we don't do what you want us to do, you go back to the district and do what you gotta do. And you know what that means. But we're here to continue to make life better. Really, it's just making life better for all of us and all of our constituents.
I was going to call on you.
It just seems like sometimes we didn't talk about the individual responsibility long before we get to needing to see a doctor. And one of the things that I think happens very often is that we haven't been educated on the types of foods, the corn syrup that's in everything,
Yes.
the sugar. I've gained 20 pounds in the last 2 months just from eating those stupid mints that are really soft. I'm addicted to them. But the thing is that I wish we can get legislation to have the schools mandate that kids go through, not health class, but really a class that talks about how they market to us, how they put the cereal low for our kids to grab. And could you imagine if we required marketing on television where if it's a drug, they'll give you the side effects at the very end very rapidly? Could you imagine if they said, and when you eat at McDonald's, you have the risk of having high blood pressure, and they just name all the things that could possibly happen to you eating certain cereals and things like that. I mean, it sounds funny, but could you imagine if you turned on television and we had legislation that said you have to give the side effects to some of this food that our kids are eating and that we're eating? We may not have some of the problems that we have.
Well, I don't even know that that's going to scare us enough. Because when you have the kids, when they're first born, they're getting sugar in some form or another. So you cultivate that taste. And most of us don't want to hear our kids hollering and screaming. So, that they want this sugar. And so it's addictive. So I appreciate the comment, but just tell us, how do we control our little darlings when we have raised them on sugar to start off with?
Well, we could remove, like, I don't know how many have gone to the high schools lately, but they have vending machines that's out of this world in terms of the things that they have access to. If we had things that would cause us, and I don't want to say legislation, because I don't know if legislation is where you would go to say, cool, that you can't put these things in the school. I don't know.
Well, I'll just tell you that Dr. Miles, my chapter president and also an educator, she knows my husband, Dr. Frazier, who recently retired. He actually is actually in Augusta asked the superintendent and the school system to take the vending machines out of his school where he was a principal of, because he saw how the children were just so hyper after eating all this sugar and sodas, and he almost lost his job. So just the idea of even bringing it up, you have Coca-Cola, who is a big company, and now you're talking about taking that funding away from them, and they have a contract for the whole system. So it's not about doing the right thing. It's about corporate America, and it's about funding.
In addition.
So there are a couple of points here, and I think just to bring it in summary, one, definitely lobbying and telling stories about those who may be affected by some of these challenges in rural parts of Georgia and in Metro. But also, there's such an important role of the local community, the local jurisdiction. So with these hospitals closing, I know one tactic that we use a lot at the Centers for Disease Control is that of the healthcare community, the healthcare family. So it may not be the doctor, but maybe it's the pharmacist. How many of you guys see your pharmacist at least once a month? While they don't get the same incentives as provided for billing that a doctor can, a lot of them have personal relationships with residents. A lot of them know which residents are taking which medications, and they have been found to be one of the best resources to at least make sure people are connected, to make sure people know at least some of the basic preventative steps. And that's also a tool that could be used in some of the local programming, is to make sure that the family, the community that is around individuals has the same message, so that patients are hearing the things at their churches, they're hearing them at their schools, they're hearing them at their local pharmacy, and hopefully it'll help them to begin to make the right decisions. But it is, corporations have a lot of money, and they have a lot of influence in ways that we may even never realize as individuals, as minorities. And it really is just about collectivism and making sure our voices are combined with other partners who are also share the same message in the state.
And I think that your point about corporations, I've read recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Coca-Cola was beginning to lose a large share of the market in the United States based on sugar. And so much sugar in their drinks. They still have a large market overseas, but the United States seems to be waking up a bit. Is that correct, or are you finding that?
So I don't know if the United States is waking up a bit as much as Coca-Cola's, they're great negotiators. So I don't know if you guys have seen the recent campaign that combines Dr. Pepper, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi. And it basically talks about you swap one for one. So if you're gonna eat unhealthy, then maybe go for a walk later on in the day. And so if you think about the backdoor conversations that led to Coca-Cola putting in millions and Pepsi and Dr. Pepper, it was probably as a negotiation so that policies related to sugar don't change. So even just understanding what we see and what is being marketed to us, a lot of times the conversation is happening in places that we're not exposed to. So that is Coca-Cola's response to some of the negative backlash. But I guarantee you their sales probably have not been affected. They probably have increased their push in schools and in some of the more vulnerable communities, Hispanics, African Americans, and their formula, they just mix it up to appease government that may be on their heels with some of their sugar content, but they're probably not changing their formula.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. One of the concerns I want to get back to, because we have just a few more minutes. How many minutes do you have? 7 minutes, okay. 7 more minutes to wrap this up. But I want to get back to the whole conversation around empowerment and also with reference to some of the issues that we face as we challenge systems. And so I would like the representatives that are here as well as from the corporate perspective to address that, because I think that we look to companies for the jobs, we look to companies for a whole lot of support, but in a large way we are not receiving it. So I want to get back to that, but there was a question somewhere. Oh, here. Okay. Please say your name.
My name is Valerie Randolph, and I'm on the board of the Metropolitan Atlanta Chapter and chair of the Health Committee. I have one action item. I invite each of you next Saturday at 9 o'clock at the Morehouse School of Medicine. The Metropolitan Atlanta Chapter will be presenting our Teen Health Summit. And it is to address many of the things that you have mentioned here this morning. So we are trying to do what we need to do in the form of health advocacy. The second thing is, as we are trying to do our advocacy work in some of the schools in Atlanta public school systems, it is so very important that we do our work of advocacy. Because as we visit these schools, we see the Coca-Cola, the vending machines. We see in the athletic departments them selling candy, to our athletes and other students in order to try to raise funds. We have to find other options. And what I wanted to know, from the legislative method, there's got to be something that we can do. I understand that from a community standpoint, as far as raising funds, we're needed. But back in the 60s and the 70s, when we were segregated in the 60s, we as a community rose up, and it was about making change. We spend the most money as African Americans than any other community. So if we take our money back, we can stop the Coca-Colas of the world and some of the other corporations that do business in our community. So from a legislative standpoint, what can we do in regards to taking these things out of the school system?
Okay, so Representative Frazier had a good idea that maybe we could start with a resolution from the Black Caucus stating that we need to go back and do something in regards to, let me back up. So, to health. But in the state of Georgia, we know that Black people make up 30% of the population, right? So you're talking about 3 million people, right? You're talking about $7.4 billion worth of buying power every year just for Black people. And so I'm going to follow back up with your question. So what are we getting back from what we're putting into these corporations? And the answer is nothing. So we have to empower ourselves, and one of the things we need to do is make sure that corporations also care about our well-being as it relates to health. Because when you talk about $7.4 billion worth of buying power per year, the Georgia budget, we just passed a mid-year budget that was $22 billion. And $7.4 billion is raised by black people alone in the state in revenue. Do y'all understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So what does that mean? We've got to start putting those numbers out there to let people realize that we are a force to be reckoned with. And once we do that, that will begin the empowerment process in and of itself. So we've got to speak the numbers. 30% of the population, 3 million black people, $7.4 billion with buying power. We deserve answers from you. And then if we start leveraging our power, then things will begin to change. But I like that idea, Representative Frazier.
And let's start that conversation, and we can start it with a resolution. And if you would help us to draft something as it relates to the health care, we would really, really appreciate it, something that we can bring to the entire caucus.
And please do it soon, because when you're in, when does the
Crossover
session?
day is next week, next Thursday, and we end actually first week in April.
When she gets the language, Representative Frazier can drop it.
Right. That's why I said, let's do it quick.
Yeah, if you can get the language, the way we need to say it and present it, I can actually get it dropped before crossover day next week.
Thank you.
Can you work with me that quickly?
I will do that.
Thank you.
I think that another important point that you raised, and that was responded, that advocacy is so critical right now. We have got to begin to use our voices, because we have the buying power, not only in this state, but as a nation, as African Americans. We make up, I think, what, 6 in the whole scheme of worldwide buying power. That we are the largest buying power in the world almost, compared to countries. So if we have that power, let's go back to what we did during the civil rights days. Let's think about the boycotts. And I mean, when we use that word, it's almost sacrilegious in some of the white folks' eyes. But at the same time, we understand that if we withdraw our money from corporations, we can shift some changes. Yes. If we withdraw our money and buying clothes, because I like to buy clothes too, when we decide who we buy from that support our causes, then we begin to have an effect. And so right now, key legislation is on the table across this country that affects us. If we talk about criminal justice system, which is not on our calendar to talk about in today's session, we have issues. If we talk about economic empowerment, we have issues. And so we have got to wake up and understand what's happening to us. And let's even just look at the fact that how many contracts are provided by the state of Georgia to minority companies. And if we don't have that economic participation at all levels, we are not going to do well as a community and as a people.
And I'm glad you just said that. So the Black Caucus held a hearing last week on transportation, because that's the thing that's going to be on the calendar today. That's huge. The governor wants it passed. The speaker, the lieutenant governor, they want transportation passed. And we do need to have transportation passed in the state. However, as a result of the hearing, the Department of Transportation Commission, DOT Commissioner Carr, in the past, we have done federal disparity studies in the state, but we've never done a state disparity study. And so as a result of what we did last week, they're going to do a state disparity study. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up the door for minority contracts across this state like we've never seen before. And so that's a win actually for the Black Caucus, because they really didn't even want to do that. That was kind of like an appeasement, but it's the right thing to do. So that was a win for us. And so we should be very glad, because the federal level is 15%. But once they open this state disparity study up, it's going to open up the door, not just in the area of transportation, because in the state of Georgia, the way it's set up, the DOT does the disparity study that sets the minority contracts for all state agencies. So this is going to open up the door for black people, especially black women, to be able to get in there and handle their business and get some of these minority contracts. So what I need y'all to do is to start making sure that you are bonded, that you have all the things that you need, to make sure that you have all the certifications, so that when the door opens, you'll be able to walk into it, okay? All right.
Hear what she just said. Be ready when the legislation hits, to act. And if you aren't ready, then it begins to sort of nibble away at. And so let's make certain that you're ready and you're positioned to take the opportunity as it presents itself. Anything else that you would like to add, because you've been somewhat quiet around economic empowerment before we close, because I know we got to go and take a picture with Governor.
Well, when we talk about economic power, it really is about us coming together collectively and watching and taking the pulse of what's going on. A lot of times we do focus a lot on the health, which is excellent, but we also got to look at how business is being conducted and how it's not being conducted. And we don't pay enough attention. How many small business owners are out there? We don't pay attention to small businesses. I don't know if you know, but small businesses are the economic engine of America, period. And as she just said, we got to be prepared for when these doors open. And a lot of times we're not prepared for them. One of the things I can really say after 20 years of being in business, it was getting the certifications, doing the due diligence. Sometimes the due diligence is the things that they're putting in place to stop us. And so if you don't get those different certifications under your belt, it's not going to happen for you. And you can't fault anyone but yourself because it's very public. Just to give you an example, I have a 16-year-old who was talking to his brother who's at UGA asking, how do we get our EIN number so that we can go into business? And he's only 16 years old. But that's where we really need to start talking to our kids about ownership, about starting their own businesses, being creative. A lot of times we beat our kids down when they say, I don't want to go to college. Not to say you shouldn't go to college, but some of these kids are brilliant and can do some things that if they went to college might take them off into a whole other area. So let's just listen to our kids because they're coming behind us and they're going to be a part of this economic engine of small businesses.
I want to say thank you to our panelists. We didn't have as much time as we wanted to have to cover all the subjects, and there's a lot left on the table. So I encourage Jamise and others to begin to have those kinds of forums in small ways to begin to build up the capacity of each of us to respond to the issues that we addressed today. Thank you so very much, ladies.